Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Aging Less, the Longevity Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Marie Stella, coming to your ears from Naarm, Melbourne, Australia. Let's learn together.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the show. Today, we are diving into the topic of chronic stress and its relationship to chronic disease. We might think of stress as something that comes and goes, but what happens when someone experiences chronic stress, and how does it impact their physical health? Joining us today to answer these questions is our esteemed guest, David Hanscom. David practiced complex orthopedic spine surgery for 32 years. He quit his practice in Seattle to present his insights into solving chronic mental and physical pain evolving from his own 15-year battle. He escaped from the ordeal and discovered that mental pain and anxiety was the biggest issue. He is an active speaker, author, and consultant. His book, Back in Control, A Surgeon's Roadmap Out of Chronic Pain, systematically presents well-documented treatments for chronic pain. He launched a movement called dynamic healing, which recognizes the interactions between stress and one's coping capacity, causing sustained threat physiology. Dealing with stress more effectively and increasing the resiliency of the nervous system allows healing. And he is working on a new book as well, addressing RUTs, or repetitive unpleasant thoughts. So we are very excited to have David join us today to guide us in our topic. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Of course. So to start out, please tell us just a bit about your background. What compelled you to start teaching patients and medical providers on how to solve chronic pain?
Well, what happened in 1990, I was driving across the bridge in Lake Washington about 10 o'clock at night, and I was coming down the ramp onto the bridge. All of a sudden, I had a panic attack. My heart started to race. I started to pass out. I was sweating. I had no idea what was going on. And it wasn't until the next day that someone told me, well, that's a panic attack. So what happened, I went to one of the top spine fellowships in the world. There's a lot of stress involved in being a spine surgeon, especially deformity surgeons. So I was one of the guys who did all the redos in town. So a tremendous amount of stress, and the way I processed it was suppressing it. So in my mind, I was fearless. My nickname in high school, college, and medical school was the Brick, and my attitude was bring it on. So what happened, I went from being really a truly fearless spine surgeon to a panic attack in 5 minutes. From that point on, for the next 13 years, I could not put that genie back in the bottle. I could not control my anxiety. So I thought anxiety was psychological, and I went to 13 years of psychotherapy, which I'm not against, but I learned that what we call anxiety is just what you feel when you're in fight or flight. So it's just your response to a threat. Your body goes into fight or flight. How do you feel? Anxious. So that's not a psychiatric diagnosis. That's a physiological state. So then you solve the problem causing anxiety, and anxiety goes away. Except if you can't solve it, then your body kicks in more chemistry plus dopamine, and you become angry. Anger and anxiety are the same thing. So that's how it started. And by 2002, I was actively suicidal. I have 20 medical colleagues actually dead from suicide. I was almost number 21. I barely escaped that. And about 6 months later, I kept muddling through, doing the things that I now teach people, but I did not know why, what happened. I didn't know how to get out of it. But inadvertently, I came across my deep anger, which I was not connected to. In other words, I thought I was fine. So my self-image was I was pretty cool. I'm this calm, fearless spine surgeon. I was an expert not only suppressing anxiety, but really expert at suppressing anger. And when it exploded, it was very, very brutal. It's the only word I can use to describe it. But within 6 months, all my symptoms disappeared. So at the worst point in my life, I had 17 different symptoms. I had migraine headaches, my scalp itched, there were skin rashes, my feet were burning, I had ringing in my ears or tinnitus, and I had severe anxiety, depression, and OCD, intrusive thought patterns. And what I didn't realize until about 5 years ago, that they're all the same thing. All of them come from the same source of stress physiology.
Wow. That's such a interesting journey, and obviously it's really inspired you a lot. Would you say that?
Well, yeah, because what happened is as a complex spine surgeon, medicine in general has gotten focused on structure. And so, for instance, the operation I tried to salvage on many people was out of a spine fusion for back pain. And I was one of those surgeons. That's the way I was trained. My first 7 years in practice, I was one of those aggressive spine surgeons who I felt badly if I couldn't find a reason to do surgery. In 1993, a paper came out of the state of Washington showing that the success rate for spine surgery for back pain was 20%. The data also showed the chance of making you worse in the presence of untreated chronic pain was 40 to 60%. So there's double the chance of making you worse than making you better. It's a huge operation. And then the spine starts breaking down above and below fusions. And so I had people 5, 10, 15, 20 operations before they got to me. So I was watching that happen and getting worse over the last 5 years of my practice. At the same time, through my own journey and starting to share things with patients, starting in 2006, I wrote my first book in 2012, the second edition in 2016. Then in 2020, I met a Dr. Stephen Porges from the polyvagal theory, and I was able to take all these diseases and put them in the context of the body's chemistry. So then I learned that anxiety, depression, bipolar, OCD, and schizophrenia are not psychological disorders. They're physiological states. So I just want to go to the core of the entire talk and work from this a little bit. So the essence of chronic disease, mental and physical, it's a state. And that is caused by chronic stress or threat physiology. So the essence of healing is developing enough safety physiology for your body to regenerate and heal. So the reason why your heart can beat for so long is that it rests between beats. When a weightlifter lifts weights, his or her muscles break down. And it's when you rest is when the muscles build up. Or a marathon runner, same thing. Your body breaks down during training. You have to have it built up. That's why overtraining is so difficult. So I've noticed since medical school that chronic stress causes symptoms, illness, and disease. But I did not know why. So from a surgeon perspective, if somebody had all these different symptoms, again, I had 17 different symptoms. And as a surgeon, I'm going, what's just psychological? So we had trot people out to the pain psychologist, and we'll talk about the repetitive thought patterns in a second, but it turns out that talking about your pain or your troubles reinforces those circuits. So it's the worst thing to do is actually go to a psychologist. Now, pain psychologists can be excellent, but just traditional talk therapy, which again, I did for 13 years, I got way worse, much sicker, but my brain was evolving in the pattern of the pain, not to where I wanted it to go. So it's the process of the last 5 years. I have my book Back in Control. It does not reflect the physiology, even though it's a great starting point. I developed a sequence called the DOC journey, Direct Your Own Care journey, that people spend 5 or 10 minutes a day on. It takes 3 to 6 months to start training your brain to go a different direction, and people consistently heal if they engage. So you can't just read a book and heal. It takes practice. So, but anyway, I just want to emphasize one point. The essence of all chronic illness, mental and physical, is sustained stress. The essence of healing is developing enough safety for your body to regenerate and heal. So you have to have threat physiology to stay alive. I mean, your body has to be on alert all the time. But when it's fired up, anxious, or angry, and is sustained, it's like driving your car down the freeway in second gear. It's going to break down, and it does.
Mm. Wow, that is fascinating. And what a journey for you to have gone on. Can I ask something as well about your experience in orthopedics before we go on? What unique insights does that experience provide into the effects of stress on the body over time?
None.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, that's the problem. I mean, if somebody, I mean, we know there's overuse injuries like knee pain and tennis elbow, etc. So that's just in our minds physical.
Yeah.
So that's why I quit my practice in 2019 because spine surgery became more aggressive, but so did hip surgery, shoulder surgery. People throw total hips in a heartbeat. The data actually shows there's more correlation of hip pain with stress than there is with the severity of the arthritis. In other words, many people with bone-on-bone arthritis have no pain. Many people with a lot of pain have essentially no arthritis. There's even a disconnect there. So again, when you're under stress, we keep thinking stress is psychological, but your entire body is fired up, including your threat physiology. And I think we should take a second for me to describe what stress physiology is. So let me just go to the dynamic healing model, is that you have your stresses in life or challenges or threats. Everybody has to deal with life challenges to stay alive. So I call it the input. Then you have your nervous system that processes all the sensory input through eyes, ears, nose, all the different sensors come into the brain. And then it sends out signals to determine your body's chemistry, physiology. And physiology, by the way, just to be clear, is how the body functions. So physiology can be safety or threat. And so what happens in sustained threat physiology is that you are in fight or flight. It means that's adrenaline and dopamine and these activating chemicals. But in your brain itself, your neurotransmitters go from calming acetylcholine to excitatory glutamate. And your brain has inflammatory cells. So your brain has excitatory neurotransmitters and is inflamed. The speed of nerve conduction doubles. Your cortisol takes fuel out of the cells. You're breaking your body down. And so threat physiology is a whole cascade of events that together really keep you ready to survive. The problem, every living creature has this, except humans have language. So remember, we talked about anxiety is that sensation that you feel when you feel a threat. So the chemical reaction, by the way, your body processes between 20 to 40 million bits of information per second. Guess how much the conscious brain processes?
I would have no idea.
40.
Right.
So it's a 1,000,000 to 1 ratio of your unconscious versus conscious brain. And human consciousness is relatively new in human evolution. It's only a couple 100,000 years old. So we have these things called thoughts. My cat has consciousness, but she doesn't have complex language. So she has this threat response. She feels anxious, but she doesn't have a word for it. Humans have that reaction that we call anxiety. And again, somehow that got into the psychological bucket where it's a physiological response to a threat. So what happens when you can't escape a threat, you have a higher response to become angry. So you cannot escape your thoughts, right? Cannot do it. What's even worse is if you suppress your thoughts, is what all we know how to do, makes it even worse. It actually shrinks your brain. So repressed thoughts and emotion cause more damage to your body physically than expressed negative thoughts. Either one's a problem. They both damage your body. So we know in chronic pain, for instance, people's brains actually physically shrink. You lose myelin, you lose neurons. Fortunately, when you treat chronic pain, your brain actually re-expands. So you look at structural changes in the brain from chronic stress.
Wow. That is fascinating. The relationship between the body and the brain there. And that is such a good introduction to our topic for today. Very in depth. Before we go a bit further, we would like to get to know you a little bit better. So let's just lighten a little bit. Can we just ask you a few more casual questions? Do you have a favorite book?
I do. They're all way too serious. So,
Yeah, fair enough.
yeah, no, I know. Probably one of the most impactful book I've ever read is called Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, which is about as dark a book as I've ever read. It's about an Austrian psychiatrist who survived Auschwitz. And he was able in the concentration camp to ask the question, what is life asking of me now? So he came out of the camp and he thrived, where many survivors were still in a victim mode, rightfully so, and they didn't thrive. So again, and then another book called, one of my favorite books is called The Boys in the Boat, which I think you probably heard of that book. And another one is Where the Crawdads Sing, which is written by the ex-wife of one of my best friends, turned out to be a national bestseller. So it's one of the most concise books I've ever read as far as being a total thriller. So anyway, those are my few books. I read mostly research papers.
Yeah, fair enough. A lot of our guests on the show do say that, so you're not alone there. And also, do you have a favorite movie or something you've enjoyed recently?
Well, my favorite movie, my wife makes fun of me, is called Cinema Paradiso. It's a
Hmm.
classic. Have you heard of that movie?
No, but I haven't heard of most
Oh,
movies, to be fair.
okay.
So,
Well, trust me, it's just about a young kid whose father had left, and the person who ran the local movie theater adopted him. It's based in Italy. Incredible music, and my wife and I watch it every year. So, yeah, Cinema Paradiso is one of them. The other one is, yeah, lots of them, but that one's one of my favorites.
yeah, absolutely. And are you listening to any podcasts at the moment?
I'm mostly busy doing them. So
Yeah,
yeah.
true.
So I don't drive very far. So in the car I listen to them. I've not really listened to podcasts for a few years.
Yeah, sure. And do you have a role model, either in your professional or in your personal life?
Yeah, I've got several of them. My biggest one is a guy by the name of Paul Brand, who was 93 years old when he passed away. He wrote a book, Pain, the Gift That Nobody Wants. And he was a hand surgeon and cleared that I'll never forget when he was 90 years old. I was putting on a conference in Seattle on pain, and he flew across the country on 5 hours of sleep. He gave 3 lectures the next day, and just the most insightful person I've ever met. And he was a person who figured out that the deformities caused by diabetes were actually from lack of sensation, not from the blood sugars.
Hmm.
So he single-handedly just revolutionized diabetic care. Personally, I have a friend of mine, Dave Saby, who's a real estate developer in Seattle, who he's actually doing some leadership mentoring with about a dozen of us. And one of the most disciplined people I've ever seen, just keeping his brain focused on the positive. I'm not into positive thinking, but positive vision's a big difference. So the mantra that keeps me going is never waste a crisis. He's incredibly creative, incredibly inspiring. So those are my current ones.
Wow, that's amazing. And finally, is there a course or a class that you've taken, or maybe that you've taught, that has inspired you?
My wife and I put on these workshops back in New York at the Omega Institute. They were 3-day and 5-day workshops. Sometimes my stepdaughter helped us. Sometimes Fred Luskin, the author of Forgive for Good, worked with us. Bernie Siegel is a famous author who helped us with one workshop. And what we found out within 3 to 5 days, 80% of people would go to pain free. And that's where I learned the principles of treating chronic pain is that the antidote to pain is play. And what it does, it creates a massive physiological response to safety. So it was structured. There were small groups, large groups. People could not discuss their pain, which is one of the basic things in pain. And we learned that in the workshop, by the way. People actually sneak up behind the buildings to talk about their pain, just like
Hmm.
looks like smoking in high school. So between the structure, the camaraderie, my wife is a tap dancer.
Mm.
So she did rhythm and music.
Wow.
My stepdaughter is a somatic therapist. So between movement, rhythm, some didactic small group sessions, people felt like they were in an adult summer camp. So in that safe place, people with years and years of pain went to pain free in 3 to 5 days, every workshop. And I didn't understand it until I met Dr. Porges, who helped me understand that what happened in that situation was incredibly safe. People called it an adult summer camp, and they shifted into safety. Now, when they went home, of course, it went back to their pain, except their brain had tasted something. So when I came back to Seattle, unfortunately, and tried to lecture to the pain groups about how excited I was about this, I did not get much traction. But no,
Mm.
the two antidotes, true antidotes to pain are play, another one I call the spiritual journey, whatever that looks like,
Hmm.
because you're going away from the pain circuits, you're not reinforcing them.
Yeah. Wow. That is really interesting and probably something that people should look more into as well. So, we're going to move on now to some of our more in depth questions for the topic. But before we do that, just some definitions to get us started. So, what is your definition of longevity?
Well, I just wrote an article on that. So I define being alive as actually being connected to the present moment right now. So when you're anxious or angry, something in the past is now kicked up by something in the present. So when you're anxious and frustrated, you're actually not here, you're there.
Yeah.
So what the tools do is they calm your nervous system down. while you get to be in the present. So if I'm going to live 20 more years, how many of those years do I want to spend worrying, anxious, frustrated? I'm not alive at all. So it's the years, I think. So, and also, I think we talked about this before, is longevity, that there's some data that shows that 53% of all deaths are what's called systemic chronic inflammation. I won't go into the details of the profile, but basically chronic stress is heart disease, kidney disease, Alzheimer's. All these chronic diseases, physical and mental, are the same process of sustained chronic inflammation. So dementia, Parkinson, all these are from the body breaking down. So then we've known for a long time, there's called the Holmes stress scale, that they give certain points to different stresses. If your score hits 300, well, you'll be dead you'll have a major illness within 2 years. And again, your body's immune system is part of it and it's also compromised. So as we mentioned on the podcast before, one thing that's profoundly interesting is that my wife and I started playing doubles ping pong twice a week with a group at our health club. And I had a hunch there was some benefit to it. So we know with jogging, exercise, that adds about 3 to 4 years to your life. And what happens when you pass away, you don't have that slow decline. It's like falling off a cliff. So exercise prevents that slow decline, adds quality years to your life, 4 years. But what adds 7 to 9 years is racket sports. Badminton, squash, ping pong, tennis, pickleball, all these things, racket sports add 7 to 9 years to your life. In fact, the data is so profound that the US government years ago was thinking about creating this as a public health intervention, because how much does it cost to play ping pong? So we think it's a combination of camaraderie. Turns out camaraderie, social connection elicits oxytocin, which is a bonding drug, which is highly anti-inflammatory. There, of course, there's the hand-eye coordination. There's exercise. So a combination of the sociality, the hand-eye coordination, and the exercise, 7 to 9 years of life.
Wow. That is
That's
actually, yeah, that's huge. I mean, when you compare it to like jogging, as you're saying, 3 to 4 years, and then suddenly there's this jump with the racket sports. I'm gonna be telling my family about this because that's fascinating to me. I've never heard of it before.
Well, also, if you find out, we got a ping pong table for our backyard. We've had a lot of fun until my wife started beating me. That wasn't as much fun.
Yeah.
but it's funny when you bring a ping pong table out, everybody's played ping pong sometime in their life. It's not that hard to get better at it, but it changes the entire dynamic of the group. So again, one of the cardinal rules of healing from pain is not discussing your pain. So you can sit around and complain and talk about your pain or politics, or you can go out and play ping pong. It changes the dynamic completely.
Exactly. Wow. That's really interesting. Now, my next question for you, perhaps less exciting, unfortunately, is how would you define stress?
Well, it's actually why we're here. So most of us think stress is psychological, correct?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. And I felt if I was stressed out, that I was a whip. So my attitude towards stress and why I became this crazy spine surgeon was, bring it on. You cannot hurt me. And so I was just a master at suppressing stress. So stress is just your total body threat. Adversity, mental pain, physical pain, challenges at work, challenges in a relationship, that's stress. So your stress response is a physiology. So in the dynamic healing model, you have your input, you have your nervous system, and the output, which is the physiology. So emotions are what you feel. That's the physiology. Thoughts are input. So there's psyche involved in the input. So that's one of the stresses, but there's all sorts of stresses in life. Trying to drive down the freeway here in Oakland is a challenge. So there's lots of stresses that keep the body fired up. So stress is a physiological process. It is not psychological. The reason why it's so critical, like we mentioned before, the stress response is about 1 million times stronger than your conscious brain. So if you want to use positive thinking, mind over matter, it can't work and it doesn't work. So it's really critical in the mental health world to understand that part of dealing with unpleasant thought patterns is you have to address the physiology.
Right. That's really interesting. And obviously something that people probably aren't aware of because they get told that they can do the mind over matter, like you were saying.
Right.
Exactly. So given that, what is the relationship between stress and longevity?
Well, I mean, let's take, you've heard of ACE scores, adverse childhood experiences?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's just a 10-point score that was published in the 1990s. They just rated life stresses of physical, sexual, and emotional neglect and abuse, a parent in prison, a parent in drugs. In other words, being raised in an unsafe environment. So what happens is that your body is tuned to be hyper alert for danger. So once those circuits are set in place, those don't change for the rest of your life. And so what happens, the data shows very clearly that people live 7 years shorter. They are depressed, anxious, they don't do well. Another stress is bullying, which is a major problem. So there's a study out of England, a 50-year follow-up study on bullying. First of all, 40% of children in England were bullied, but they didn't thrive. Their lives were shorter, more heart disease, suicide, depression, all these things. Their relationships weren't good. So if your body's on high alert, there's something happens that people don't understand is that the blood supply to your neocortex or thinking brain gets downregulated. Your thinking brain doesn't work correctly. So anytime you're anxious or frustrated, you're in your lower brain. So to actually get into your upper brain, you have to calm down and get into safety. So in your survival brain, you've lost choice. The way you create your new brain, neuroplasticity, is that you calm your survival physiology down, then you repeatedly make positive choices. So you program back in what you want. So the problem is under a hyperactive nervous system, your body starts breaking down, your thinking brain's not in line, people have many more diseases. And the metaphor I like to use is that of a feral cat, that you can't talk to a feral cat. You can't even train a feral cat. The number one thing to heal is feeling safe. So as you work with a feral cat, you just, again, not try to train it, just help it calm it down, whatever way you decide to do that. It's the same thing with humans. When you come from a hyper critical environment, we talk about the self-critical voice in a second, but if you don't feel safe in your own skin with your own voices, then your body is always in fight or flight. That causes less lifespan, but also quality of life. So I still want to go back to the same thing. If you're anxious or frustrated, you actually aren't, in a way, really fully alive.
Yeah. Wow. That is really interesting as well. I love your analogy about the cat as well. I feel like a lot of people can relate to that when they get like a rescue cat and it's not used to being safe. It doesn't know safety really.
Right.
And creating that space for it. That's really interesting.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Are you a cat person or a dog person? Or
Well,
either?
I'm going to say neither. I think I'm a cat person, but I'm kind of allergic. So it's a bit of a problem.
That's a bummer.
Yeah, they're really sweet. Dogs are a bit too energetic for me, I think.
Yeah, no, I think they're both have their own ways to do it. I've always been a dog person. We've had a cat now who's 15 years old, and she's insane. She absolutely trains us. It's unbelievable.
Wow, that's so interesting. Yeah, unfortunately, in my family, like me and my dad, bit allergic to cats. My mum and her side of the family don't love dogs, so I didn't grow up with either.
Okay.
That's why I don't really have an answer, but it's interesting. So my next question for you then, what are some misconceptions about chronic stress?
The usual stuff, you need to talk it out, right? That you're not tough enough if you don't deal with it, that this is all imaginary. In surgery, particularly, we say if somebody's stressed out, well, this must be psychological. So even though people have skin rashes and they have migraine headaches, all these things I had that are gone, we trot them out to the pain psychologist who actually talks about the stresses more.
Right.
So again, let me step back and talk about the healing journey for a second, the concepts. I call it the sequence of healing with the letter C. So the key word with healing, if you only remember one word from today's podcast, is the word awareness. So if you're not aware where you are right this second, you're not connected to the present moment, you're just reacting and reacting and reacting. So the key word that allows you to change your brain is awareness. So the way healing works is that you separate your identity from your survival physiology, which is very dark. It's destructive, it's dark. My cat doesn't care what she does to defend herself. She has no moral compunctions about killing a bird. So humans have all these stories we put onto these actions. So they're the same dark impulses that are destructive. And of course, if you take them personally, it's a bit of a problem. So your brain starts racing. I'm not that person. I could be thinking these thoughts, etc. They're universal. Everybody has them. So what happens, you intellectually separate your personality, who you are, from your survival physiology. And so, again, it's a 1,000,000 to 1 ratio. And you just train your brain not to react to your physiology and you realize that it is a gift that's keeping you alive. That's the stress response. Then over on the other side, you nurture neuroplasticity. So what happens, the sequence is a metaphor of a tree with the letter C standing for connection, confidence, and creativity. So the connection is connecting to everything in your past. So the good, the bad, every second of your past, you just get to connect with it with awareness, and you train your brain not to be as reactive. It's the reactivity that fires up the nervous system. So connection is the starting point. The confidence are the tools to train your brain to be with your pain, not to be okay with it, again, mental or physical pain. But the healing occurs at the top of the tree in the branches of creativity. So as you, through neuroplasticity, stimulate your brain to go do direction, that's where the healing occurs. You're not fighting pain circuits. You're not fighting your past. You're not doing battle with your stress physiology. You've separated and moved a different direction. And once you can break past the anger standpoint, which is another conversation for another day, it's game on. So at the top of the tree, you can grow as many branches as you want. You can go as high as you want. And so when people break that threshold, their anxiety drops. Again, I had 17 different physical and mental symptoms that are gone. They're gone. I had ringing in my ears for 25 years, burning in my feet for 20 years, migraine headaches since I was 5. They are gone. And it makes no sense unless you look at the core cause of being the sustained stress physiology. So you have chronic threat physiology. We talked about what that looks like. It's a complex process. It's not just adrenaline and cortisol, it's your immune system. And so as your body calms down, you can heal. So anyway, so the sequence of healing is connection, confidence, and creativity. And as you stimulate your brain to where you want it to go, I have a little saying, to have a good life, you have to live a good life. So that's why one of the basic tools or strategies of the process is never complaining, no negativity, no giving unasked for advice, no criticism, no talking about your pain or medical care, no gossip, because where's your brain going? So our brain is incredibly programmable. So what happens when people heal, they do quit talking about their pain. But I'm learning, again, I've done this for 20 years, and I'm still working on things. I become very selective about what I choose to put into my brain, because once it's in there, it is in there.
Yeah, that's really
Right?
interesting and definitely something that people should take away from this as well.
But also another little saying, quit fighting darkness. I mean, survival physiology is dark. Why not just turn on the light? So the darkness is infinite. I call it the abyss. And by turning on the light, truly turn on the light, people really do move a different direction. And it's unbelievable the extent of the healing. It happens every time when somebody actually hits that threshold, bam, all of a sudden they hit a different reality. And it's a reality that they never knew. Anxiety drops, energy goes up, physical symptoms disappear, their whole demeanor changes. It's absolutely transformed. That's what got my practice. It's transformative because it wasn't just to manage chronic pain. That does not interest me. But watching people going from absolute hopelessness, again, I call it the abyss, to not only healing but thriving. And I was watching people badly damaged by spine surgery. I just couldn't do it anymore. So you asked me why couldn't I practice? I felt like at some point I just had to do it.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Okay, so I know that you're writing a book on RUTs, or repetitive unpleasant thoughts or unwanted thoughts. So can you tell us a bit about that and how people can combat those?
So I watch hundreds of people get rid of their physical pain, multiple symptoms, even anxiety would drop, depression would drop, their life grew dramatically. But I also noticed people are quite tortured with these thought patterns that just buzz around like mosquitoes, like flies. Some people it's sort of minimal, not a big deal. Some people really intrusive, unpleasant thoughts. And so what happens is people think like, I'm not good enough. Nobody likes me. I'm a fraud. People have body image issues. And these thoughts keep buzzing around in your head. Well, there's two aspects to it. One of them is that your conscious brain reflects your physiology. So if you're in threat, fight or flight physiology, your thoughts are going to be somewhat unpleasant. On alert, looking for danger, you give a meaning to these internal sensations called interoception. And so if you're in a constant stress state, your thought patterns are going to be fired up. Particularly if you're angry and feel trapped, your thought patterns really fire up. But even still, there's a point where you don't have to be, again, it's a sympathetic nervous system that gets activated when you're upset. So the first step of stress, we call it the vagal brake. So there's a balance between the parasympathetic or calming system and the sympathetic excitatory system. The first thing that happens is the vagal brake is released. So you may not be in fight or flight, but we think that's where these unpleasant, unwanted thought patterns occur. Everybody has them. Now, if you're not connected to them, it is what it is, but suppressing these thought patterns actually has some penalties on your health. So what we tend to do, we have some crazy thought and we toss it aside. And we all know the white bears experiment where you try not to think about something, you think about it more, right? Mm-hmm. But they demonstrated that you think about it a lot more. So it turns out who your demons are actually who you are not. So why don't we have unwanted positive thoughts? Because we don't suppress them. Why are we not bothered with an excess of positivity? Because we're not suppressing positivity, we're suppressing negativity, which fires up the nervous system. So your demons are actually who you are not. But the other problem is if you're a well-intentioned person, you interpret your threat physiology more negatively. You spend a lot of time creating these stories about yourself, not really this person who thinks these thoughts. So you have these cognitive, rational structures trying to combat your survival physiology. So your physiology drives the thoughts. And the metaphor I like to use is that of a hornet's nest, where the nest represents your nervous system, and the bees or hornets represent your thoughts. And if somebody shakes the nest, i.e. anxious or frustrated, the hornets are pretty unhappy. So then we're outside the nest fighting the hornets outside of the nest. Well, what does that do to the hornets? It doesn't really work. So we're fighting these hornets outside the nest, thought, counter thought. We're trying to distract ourselves. We're trying to outrun these things, and you get worn out. So the real answer is quit shaking the nest. So what happens is that, and there's some debate about this, but in medicine in general, we have all sorts of treatments for different disorders. Again, they're not psychological as much as they're physiological. These repetitive thought patterns are not particularly considered treatable. So I had the worst of these very intrusive, repetitive thoughts. And remember, it's a function of your physiology. So what happens is that we have these stories about ourselves to feel better about ourselves in the face of this survival physiology. It takes a lot of energy to create the stories. It takes a lot of energy to defend them. Plus, we're programmed in a large part by negativity. Or I just talked to a woman this morning who parents had high ideals. So she was never good enough. She wasn't abused, but I think that having unmeetable ideals laid out for you is another form of abuse in the form of not good enough. So perfectionism is one of the most pervasive ways of keeping your brain fired up. So the issue is you can't suppress the thoughts. You can't do battle with them. Talk therapy just makes them worse. So the key word is, again, awareness. You separate from the thoughts. And as far as tools to start the process, we call it expressive writing. You simply write down the thoughts you're trying to suppress and you tear them up. The reason why you tear them up is to write with absolute freedom, because the more crazy the thoughts you actually get on paper, the more powerful the process. Not a solution, but say thought separation exercise. Mindfulness, another way to do it. Relaxation techniques, a way of separating from the thoughts. So that's changing the input. The second thing, which is big, is calming down the nervous system. And again, going back to the dynamic healing model, you have the input nervous system and the output. So as far as the input, forgiveness, anger is a major one. Addressing anger is always a tipping point of healing every time. And it's the repressed anger that we're not connected to that's actually the most damaging anger. Not discussing your pain, again, sensory input. Being nice to people, again, changing sensory input. So there's the input part of things, because remember, the most stressful stresses are the ones that you cannot solve, and you cannot escape your thoughts. So in the nervous system, you increase the resilience of the nervous system, just like that feral cat. So you teach the nervous system to calm down. You learn to be nice to yourself instead of being self-critical. Exercise, diet, and sleep are big. Sleep is probably number one, by the way. Then the final part on the output, you can do breath work, you can do relaxation techniques, humming, certain pitches of music, sociality. All these things actually calm down the physiology directly. So you have the input, the nervous system, and the output. So at the end of the day, you're going to safety physiology, decreasing threat. Then your thought patterns start dropping down. And of course, the thoughts themselves fire up the physiology. Physiology fires up the thoughts. So you have to address both aspects of it. So if you do expressive writing without the physiology calming down, that doesn't work. Or you just calm down the physiology without dealing with the thoughts. You have to deal with both. But at the end of the day, there's two more steps of healing repetitive, unwanted thoughts. So that you separate from your thoughts, you calm down your physiology. By the way, this is done every day. Anger and anxiety are always there. The third part is you kill your ego. Now, I'm saying that tongue in cheek because you can't really kill your ego completely, but you have this unpleasant survival physiology. You're programmed by negativity. So we create these stories in our mind to feel better about ourselves. It takes a lot of mental work to do that and maintain it. It doesn't work. So then you develop what's called mental rigidity, where you're not open to new ideas. You're defending your position. It takes an awful lot of repetitive thought patterns to actually deal with that. So the third phase is actually killing the ego. Then the final part, again, the real healing occurs with creativity, play, spiritual journey, good food, good wine, good friends. That's where the healing occurs. The other ones are just the tools to calm down and reroute. But unless you actually nurture play and sociality, you're not going to heal. So anyway, with the DOC journey, DOC journey, it's on my website. It's 10 to 15 minutes a day. So the emphasis is on the tools, not the pain. So if you're trying to get rid of the pain, pain is running the show. You want to practice your skills about common physiology and nurturing joy, two separate but linked skill sets. That's how you heal.
Wow. There are so many different aspects to this that some of them I'd heard of before, and you've given us some techniques, and a lot of it I haven't. So thank you so much for sharing. I'm sure our listeners are learning a lot at the moment. I want to move on now to our practices and habits section. Now, this might seem like a simple question to some people listening, especially considering all the in depth things that we've been talking about so far. But what is a habit that you would recommend to reduce stress?
Again, I'm going to go back to the dynamic healing model.
Hmm.
So again, the problem with chronic pain, mental and physical, people want that answer. So every day is different. So you learn to navigate adversity more quickly. So you use different tools every day, depending on the circumstances. Maybe you haven't slept for a while. Of course, sleep is a big one. Maybe if I quit doing my expressive writing, for instance, for a couple of weeks, my skin rashes pop up again, my ears start to ring. So if you look at the big picture, again, please don't go away from this podcast thinking I'm going to do this, this, and this and solve my pain. The doc journey is 10 or 15 minutes a day, and it's just a whole process of learning to calm and reroute your nervous system. So that's the tricky part. Chronic pain is very complex. Each person is incredibly individual. And so by definition, it has to be self-directed. I can spend 8 hours a day with you. I am not going to solve your pain. In fact, I'm going to make it worse. So you're the one that knows which tools work, which ones don't. You know it's good for you. I actually don't. So I ask people to do homework first, understand chronic pain, and then figure out the different tools that work for you and take charge.
That's amazing. And just like bringing that back onto the person themselves, like, you know, your body and you can figure this out with the tools is really
Right.
empowering, I think, as well.
Right.
So I'd like to move on now to our open mic section. This is your chance to talk about anything you're passionate about, anything you want to promote. It doesn't even have to be related to what we've talked about so far. So the floor is yours.
Well, I wish I wasn't so passionate about what I'm doing because I love playing golf. I played golf maybe 10 times in 5 years since I quit, which is shocking. But I keep seeing people that are suffering horribly go to pain free. And I'll just tell you two quick stories. One is both with friends of my son. One, they're both in their 40s. And one is a gentleman who lives in the Bay Area. He's my friend's son in law. He's had chronic pain for 20 years, completely disabled by it. He was able to hold a job, but he couldn't weight lift, he couldn't jog, he couldn't play tennis, he couldn't do anything. So he started working with these concepts about 2 years ago, and he came on my ski trip this year, which is a guy's ski trip. No pain, no limitations. He's weightlifting, he's jogging, he's playing tennis, he's unbelievable, no pain. That's after trying everything for 20 years. The other guy on the ski trip is a guy named Matt, who had a surgical lesion in his back. He couldn't even stand up straight. And so he showed me his x-rays last year and said, well, Matt, I think you need surgery. But let's do what we call a prehab process of calming things down before surgery. So we started with the book, started with the website, and I was trying to help him find a surgeon. He came on the ski trip this year, no pain, skiing at a very high level, zero restrictions. He still had the surgical lesion. So he'd been suffering badly for at least 3 years. So it's hard for me not to do this. So, I mean, you watch, so not only do people break loose, they actually thrive at a level that I can't even put into words. So it's so solvable. And my only request to the world is just keep an open mind. I also tell people do not believe a word I'm saying. No, I'm serious, because here's the deal. So it's about connection, and you've tried everything. Why does David Hanscom have anything to say that's going to help me? Right?
Right.
Okay, so that's what's in there. That's connection. So it's not about generating enough belief in me or my book or my process. It's about listening and learning what you can and can't do. And I do want to say one final thing, which blew my mind a few weeks ago. I run a scientific study group roundtable. I've done it for about 5 years. We have people from all over the world and that are experts in their field. There's a Dr. Bernie Siegel who wrote a book called Love, Medicine, and Miracles in the 1980s. And he formed what's called an Exceptional Cancer Survivors Group. And I become good friends with him. I go, Bernie, who are these people? Who are these people that spontaneously heal from terminal 4 cancer? And he sort of got a little impatient with me. He's 93 years old. He's 93, and he goes, look, this is not spontaneous healing. It's self-induced healing. And as I listened to him, I realized it's the same process that helps people heal from chronic pain. So the bottom line is they take agency of their life. They understand they're going to die from terminal cancer. And one of the key issues is they quit looking for answers. Because you keep looking for answers, you're always looking forward, you're not connecting to what's right now. They take full responsibility for every aspect of their life, mental and physical. They quit blaming. They just take control and live their life with what they have. They move forward. They make real changes, finances, relationships, jobs, whatever it is. They just make the changes and start living the life they want to live. And then one thing that was really interesting, the data came out that if somebody asks you to do something that you really don't want to do and you do it anyway, in other words, you're a people pleaser, which a lot of us are, particularly me, it's bad for your health. It's actually healthier to say no. The only corollary I would add to that, if you decide to say yes, then own it. So it still boils down to the tipping point I've seen forever is always around anger. And you can't really get happy if you're holding on to anger, particularly repressed anger. So these people, so the comment that you've already mentioned this earlier, the comment that Bernie made that really stuck with me is that people are so busy living, they forgot to die. And they go to their doctors years later and there's no cancer. So that was about 6 weeks ago, and I'm still trying to process what he said. But yeah, you just take charge of your life, take control, move forward with decisiveness, things change. Then he said something that I hadn't heard him say before. Maybe he did listen to me finally, where he said, what happens is a profound shift in the physiology to safety.
Yeah. Wow, that is fascinating. I feel like something that people will not have thought of in the realm of cancer. Like when you think of cancer, you don't think of it just, like you're saying, is it a spontaneous or is it, something you work towards for that to go away? But that's really
Well, every cancer has actually been connected to chronic stress. The only two that have not been connected is melanoma and colon cancer. Every other cancer is connected to chronic stress.
Wow. I feel like we've learned so much today in this episode that I just had no idea about. And there's been bits and pieces that I've caught on to that I've gone, oh, yeah, I've heard about this before. But for the most part, it's just been so much learning. So thank you so much for joining us on the show today. We're going to wrap up. But if our listeners want to find out some more about you, where should they go?
So all my resources are on my website, backincontrol.com. It's one word, backincontrol.com. You can email me. My email is on the website. It's also dnhanscom@gmail.com. And I'm quite good at answering emails. And the course is called the Doc Journey course, and that's actually on the website. Then we just created a series of flip books, of which we're continuing to develop, that are just little flip books that give you bits and pieces in an overview process. And so that's out there. Do you know Bruce Lipton by chance?
Don't think so.
He wrote a book called The Biology of Belief. He's a cell biologist. And he and I did a series of 4 videos together, which is also on the website. And it was a remarkable experience for both of us. But we created 4 videos of about 40 minutes each going through this process we talked about today. So lots of resources on the website. But again, if you decide to do the Doc Journey course, just, again, the keyword is persistence. That's the only thing you have to do is be persistent. It's like learning any skill. The focus is on attaining skills, not on the pain.
Wow. That is absolutely fantastic for all our listeners to go and check that out. And we will put those links for you in our show notes as well, so that they're easy to find. So I'm going to wrap up now. I have absolutely learned so much from you today, and I want to have a look into more of it as well, because you've explained it in such a fabulous way. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. And I hope our audience has learned just as much as I have. So to our audience, thank you for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next episode.
Thank you.
You have been listening to Aging Less, the Longevity Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes are available from 10 life management perspectives and can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and other podcasting apps available on your devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, share, and subscribe to our channel so that other people can find it and we can continue to provide quality content. More of our work can be found on our website at longevity.lifemanagementsciencelabs.com, where you can join our movement. I'm Marie Stella. Thanks for tuning in.